With the bike inverted or on a work stand, begin by using a 5mm hex wrench to remove the 2 front brake caliper bolts. Remove the caliper. On the inner side of the caliper, use needle nose pliers to unbend the end of the cotter pin that retains the brake pads. With the cotter pin straightened, push it out of the caliper and remove it completely. Push the top edge of the brake pads down and remove them from the bottom side of the brake caliper. Swap the new brake pads onto the return spring with the braking surfaces facing inward toward each other. Pinch the brake pads together to compress the spring and guide them back into the brake caliper from the bottom up. Center them and align the pads and spring to the cotter pin hole at the top side of the caliper. Reinstall the cotter pin from the front side, capturing both brake pads and the spring. Use needle nose pliers to bend one of the ends of the cotter pin to secure it in the caliper. Realign the caliper back to the post mounts on the fork and replace both caliper mounting bolts. Do not tighten fully. Look through the window of the caliper and align the caliper so that the rotor does not contact either brake pad. Fully tighten each caliper bolt while maintaining this position. Carefully spin the front wheel to test the caliper adjustment. If the rotor is rubbing, the caliper or rotor may require further adjustment. In order to swap the rear brake pads, begin with the bike inverted or on a work stand. Unstrap the 3 lower Velcro straps from the frame and fold the wheel mesh guard out of the way. Use a 5mm hex wrench to remove the 2 rear brake caliper mounting bolts. Remove the caliper. Keep note of the orientation of the caliper adapter as well as the caliper mounting bolts. On the inner side of the caliper, use needle nose pliers to unbend the end of the cotter pin that retains the brake pads. With the cotter pin straightened, push it out of the caliper and remove it completely. Push the top edge of the brake pads down and remove them from the bottom side of the brake caliper. Swap the new brake pads onto the return spring with the braking surfaces facing inward toward each other. Pinch the brake pads together to compress this spring and guide them back into the brake caliper from the bottom up. Center them and align the pads and spring to the cotter pin hole at the top side of the caliper. Reinstall the cotter pin from the front side, capturing both brake pads and the spring. Use needle nose pliers to bend one of the ends of the cotter pin to secure it in the caliper. Reinstall the caliper bolts with their washers into the brake caliper. Install the caliper adapter on the underside of the rear brake caliper. The longer bolt and taller side of the adapter will face toward the front of the bike. Realign the caliper back to the post mount on the fork and replace both caliper mounting bolts. Do not tighten fully. Look through the window of the caliper and align the caliper so that the rotor does not contact either pad. Fully tighten each caliper bolt while maintaining this position. Carefully spin the rear wheel to test the caliper adjustment. If the rotor is rubbing, the caliper or rotor may require further adjustment. Replace all 3 Velcro straps to secure the wheel mesh guard. To remove the front wheel, place the bike upside down, use a 6mm hex wrench on the front through axle, and turn clockwise since the front axle is reverse threaded. Remove the axle completely. Lift the wheel up and out of the fork. Use a Torx T25 to unthread each of the 6 rotor bolts and remove the rotor. Swap the rotor. Place the new rotor onto the front hub with the markings facing upward. Thread all 6 rotor bolts in by hand. Use a Torx T25 to thread the rotor bolts in fully. Tighten the rotor bolts evenly in a star pattern. Torque each bolt 2 to 4 Newton meters. Ensure the fork axle nut is properly inserted into the right fork leg. Drop the wheel back into the fork and position the rotor into the brake caliper. With grease applied to the threads, insert the through axle from the non-drive side. Use a 6mm hex wrench to tighten the through axle by turning counterclockwise. Secure the axle nut with your other hand while tightening the axle. Torque the axle 10 to 15 Newton meters. To remove the rear wheel, remove the Velcro strap around the motor cable. Proceed to carefully cut the zip tie securing the motor harness to the frame. Unthread and disconnect the motor harness from the cable coming from the hub motor. Use an 18mm socket or open end wrench to loosen and remove the rear wheel axle nuts. Remove the washer on each side as well. Work the rear wheel up and out of the dropouts of the frame. Use a Torx T25 to unthread each of the 6 rotor bolts and remove the rotor. Swap the rotor. Place the new rotor onto the rear hub with the markings facing upward. Thread all 6 rotor bolts in by hand. Use a Torx T25 to thread the rotor bolts in fully. Tighten the rotor bolts evenly in a star pattern. Torque each bolt 2 to 4 Newton meters. Reinstall the torque washer onto the axle. Guide the rear wheel back into the rear dropouts of the frame. Be sure to engage the chain onto the cassette and guide the brake rotor in between the pads in the caliper. Ensure the flat-edged axle drops fully into the dropouts on both sides. The torque washers should be on the inner side of the axle and the tabs should fit into the frame dropout as shown. Using an 18mm socket or open-end wrench, reinstall both of the washers and axle nuts onto the axle. Torque 40 to 45 Newton meters. Reconnect the motor harness by aligning the arrows of the 2 ends, firmly pressing them together, and threading the lock rings together until snug. Replace the zip ties that secure the cables to the frame and trim the excess zip tie ends. Finish by replacing the mesh wheel guard Velcro strap over the frame and cables. With the bike powered off, pedal the drivetrain and shift through the gears to test for proper function. Test the shifting and ensure the drivetrain runs smoothly.